a CNBC original podcast.
We all have to make big decisions in our lives, decisions that define and influence our professional and personal journeys. If you reflect on them, some were good, and some I'm sure you definitely regret. In my nearly 3 decades as a financial journalist, I've interviewed literally thousands of CEOs, politicians, and market voices, and they all had to make decisions and choices to get where they are today. In this podcast, I hear about those decisions, as well as the moments of doubt, risk, and conviction that impacted our guests' journeys and the people they lead. This is Executive Decisions with me, Steve Sedgwick. In this episode, I speak to Victor Riparbelli.
I grew up with all these interests that was kind of outside of the beaten path. I hated going to school. I hate when people tell me what to do, like learning something because I'm told to learn something.
So you're rebellious.
I'm very rebellious.
Victor is the visionary behind video content platform Synthesia. It's one of the UK's most valuable generative AI startups.
It was a total fringe idea. We went out and said to people, look, in 10 years, you can make a Hollywood film on a laptop with just your imagination.
After a semester abroad at Stanford University, a life back in Denmark just didn't sit right with the Scandinavian native.
I love Denmark. It's an amazing place, but it's really not a place that inspires ambition and drive and innovation, right?
These are Victor Riparbelli's executive decisions. One of the key purposes of this podcast is to work out how people become what they are, how they become the entrepreneur, the founder, the leader that they are as well. From a very early age, how did you see yourself in the world?
I think when you're a kid, right? Like you're a kid. I think I always felt different in some ways, and that I had interests that I feel like my peers maybe didn't have. There's like a very kind of sort of interesting thing, which is that when I was a kid, I was almost like half deaf. Mm-hmm. So I had like a bunch of my eardrum got replaced like 3 or 4 times, things like that. And when you can't hear very well, what tends to happen to kids, right, is that you become sort of more in your own world. So I was reading a lot of books and doing a lot of things in kind of my own time. I was never an outsider in the sense that I always had lots of friends, and I wasn't like the weird kid in the corner just on my computer. But I just always think I had like a very rich inner world from a very young age. And I think this was probably in huge part to just the amount of reading I would do. I would read a book a day almost when I was very, very young, and just immerse myself in all these kind of fantastical worlds, especially when I was a kid, right? And I think when I discovered computers, the internet, the local library, all of a sudden the kind of world of knowledge just expanded very rapidly. And I just I've always been much more interested in sort of weird fringe ideas, music, film. Mm-hmm. I don't know where that stems from, but I think in my later life, I think if I have to sort of look back, I think that's probably always been one of my strengths, that I know a lot of things about a lot of things. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's the knowledge that, in theory would not be very valuable, that ends up in connection with a bunch of other things you've also learned in your life that become really valuable, right? So I think my understanding of like culture and trends was probably one of the first things I noticed when I was young. I was very good at predicting like what music would be popular, what clothing would be popular. Never much as someone who was like, part of it, but more as like an observer of like what's kind of happening around me. I think later on in life, I think that translated well into business, right? Where I'm not an AI researcher. Like we're not successful because, I sat at, some great university and came up with a new technology and commercialized it, right? That's not me. That's my teammates, my co-founders, my colleagues who are excellent at that. But I think what I am uniquely good at is kind of looking around corners and seeing trends. And that's driven really just by a very deep curiosity for the world, I think.
You've mentioned a lot of fascinating things, that you felt that your problem with your hearing at an early age made you more resilient in many ways. Did it aided your creativity? Because you say that you read a lot, but you weren't the outsider. You had lots of friends as well. How did that work? So you were part of a big group and you felt part of society, part of your school class, or you felt aloof from it?
Well, I've always felt both.
Yeah,
I've never
that's
felt
a
like
contradiction.
It is kind of a contradiction, but I think I've always just had this like side of me that I never really shared with much other than like a few friends, and actually I would say almost to this day is I would say almost still the case. I have very deep friendships with people around very specific things, some of my best friends will be all about music, and we go extreme deep on that. And I think most people who met me in my teenage years and kind of before Synthesia would probably not like notice these things around. Just like Victor's like an average normal guy, likes to go out, likes to have fun, and does what most other normal kids do. But as everyone, of course, we have our own interests and curiosities, right? And I think I just never in Denmark really felt like there was that many people to share it with, because I think it's a lovely place, but it's a small place, right? And I think people tend to believe what others around them believe, and maybe not really challenge themselves as much with kind of their thinking. And I just found early on that getting into heated discussions around these things just didn't feel very productive, because I didn't feel like it was like a high quality discussion.
Who were the people who supported you most? Was it family? Was it friends? Was it educators? Or was it a combination of the above?
I'd say it's definitely family and friends, right? So I have two amazing parents that have always let me pursue my interest and been supportive of that. Both in my early life, but also in my kind of later life. And actually, my dad was at some point in my teenage years when I was very confused about what I should do with my life. And he's like, well, you've always been really good at computers. Why don't you do something with that? And when he said that, it was like the most obvious thing. But for some reason, I never really like put, two and two together.
Well, what did you think you had to do before your father gave you that epiphany?
Well, I was kind of lost a little bit in my teenage years. I think I grew up with all these interests that was kind of outside of the beaten path. I hated going to school. I hate when people tell me what to do, like learning something because I'm told to learn something.
So you're rebellious.
I'm very rebellious, to the point where it can become sometimes probably, a net negative. But I'm very rebellious, and I really dislike, a teacher telling me that I have to learn something just because. There was one of my early teachers who said, Victor is I think you said he's very smart and he's very deeply interested, just rarely in what the rest of the class is doing. And I think that's probably always been like a theme in my life, that the things I'm very interested in, I get obsessed with, I know everything about them, and I can learn about it very, very quickly. But if I don't have an actual real interest in something, it's very hard for me to do that.
But is that a problem with education, as you see it, and for the generations that come after you as well, that there is a conformity, there is a way of teaching, there is an orthodoxy that teachers say you must do this, when actually they should be perhaps igniting that flame of rebelliousness or of passion in a certain subject?
I definitely think the school system can do better. I actually think on average in Denmark, I think the school system is actually pretty great. Yeah. I think it's much less rigid than most other places in the world. I think a good part of this is also just being a teenager. I think most people are pretty confused. They don't know what to do with their life. And for me, I think it just took a bit of reflection, like what are you actually really good at? And realizing that the fact that I'm really good with computers and being on the internet and researching things, I do like build websites for fun, I create maps in computer games, I would dabble in music production, 3D graphics, all these things, which isn't necessarily because I wanted that to be my career path. But I kind of realized these are actually valuable skills, right? And the first way I realized that was that, there was in kind of my late teenage years, everyone was getting on social media. Everyone was getting a website. Everyone's getting an e-commerce store, right? Not just the big brands, but also kind of the local stores in the city that I grew up in. And I realized that I could make a website for someone in a day, And so it goes to all the local stores and say,
And how old were you then?
17, 18.
Yeah. So you're still in education and you've got this entrepreneurial streak going on.
Yeah. And I realized that there was this information arbitrage, which is that most of these stores, they would have salespeople, in suits coming by and say, I can build you a web shop for 10,000 euros, let's say. And I just discovered Shopify, this was like a young company back then, which is, a platform helping people build e-commerce stores in 5 clicks. So it's like, I can go and make a Shopify store for someone. I can change out the logo. I can replace the fonts. I can put their colors in. I can upload some pictures. And I can do all this in a day. And I don't need 10,000 euros, right? I need 500 euros because at that point in time, for me, that was a lot of money. And I remember I went around and I did this multiple times. I was like, this surely cannot be that easy. Why are other people not just using Shopify to do this themselves? Where you can foresee something, right? And you can take that prediction and actually, make money off it. And that was basically what I was doing here, right? Everybody needed a web shop. Everybody wanted an e-commerce store, a social media page. Very few people knew how to do it. And I discovered a way to do it, which was like 100 times faster than the existing industry of people driving around in suits and having to sustain like agencies where it took 10 people to build even just a very simple website, right?
But there's something going on here at around 16, 17, late teens. You've got an amazingly supportive father. You've got an education system which doesn't appear as open-minded as you'd like it to be, but you're discovering this entrepreneurial streak at the same time as well. Mm-hmm. Did you decide then that you knew what you wanted to be going forward?
I think something definitely clicked. I liked that I was in control of my own life, right? I was my own boss, essentially. And I think even more than that, I liked that I could do things my way. And I started figuring that I actually was pretty good at it. I was pretty good at making decisions. I was pretty good at making these websites. I was pretty good at putting marketing behind it to make them actually sell something online. I at that point in time also got the only corporate job I've ever had, which I had for 6 months, where I worked in a very big company and I was doing online marketing essentially. And I just really had this feeling that people were very nice, but I was just like, what's going on? Why does everything here take 10 times the amount of time it should take? They're using old technologies that, were 10 years ago, and they're not listening. I know how I can fix a lot of their problems in a tenth of the time, but they won't let me, right? And that was really like demotivating for me. So I think that kind of made me feel like the startup world and like building things and probably one day being a founder was the right path for me. Mm. So building, websites and web stores for these local businesses kind of intellectually capped out like after a few years because it was interesting, but intellectually is, selling like tennis rackets online, I think didn't really stimulate me enough intellectually, right? So I went from doing these sort of things to going into the Danish startup ecosystem, where I also met my co-founder Stefan, and there I became part of building more like products as opposed to more kind of like services, like I did with the websites. And I absolutely loved that. I thought building products was really, really, really fun. I thought growing product was really, really fun. And I met a very different type of business people that I met in business school, right? Which was these like young people with big ambitions. Everything was about moving fast, not sitting in meetings, not making PowerPoints, not doing all this sort of very corporate process-orientated things. And that, I think, attracted me a lot because it had this rebellious energy, right? To be a good entrepreneur, you're going to have to think that you're smarter than the others. You're going to have to think that you can work harder and that you've seen something that for some reason, the kind of legacy players in the industry haven't seen yet, right? And I think that tapped a lot into my personality of just generally being, I think, kind of fairly rebellious as a person.
We're going to fill in the gaps in your career in a few moments, but are you still rebellious as a leader of Synthesia today?
Yeah, I would say so.
Is that a key characteristic?
I think so. I think it's really important to be highly sensible, not letting your opinions be guided by what people around you think, right? Mm-hmm. I think if you think about it, like most of the things we believe today, we probably won't believe in 50 years, right? Like you don't have to go that far back in time to a world in which everyone thought it was completely normal that women couldn't vote, for example. In 50 years' time, I'm not saying, hopefully we're not going to go back to that, but we're going to believe a very different set of ideas than what we're believing right now. We're going to use different technologies. Like the world changes a lot, right? It's very few things from the current moment that will remain true in 50 years. And I think that realization means that I think for most people that go around believing most of the things that they say, that they read in the media or that they hear from people around them. And I think it's a really good habit to kind of by default, you should be skeptical of ideas and even technologies and points of view, right? You should really try and get to the bottom of like, what do you actually think? And I think most good entrepreneurs have this, right? You have to make a lot of hard decisions. You have to make a lot of unpopular decisions. You have to make decisions that aren't supported by data many times. So I don't know a lot of like great entrepreneurs that don't have that gene in them.
Yeah. And a lot of these great entrepreneurs, and I'm thinking of yourself, I'm thinking of some of the big tech names out there as well, they seem very frustrated by conventional wisdom, very angry almost at how people are so slow to cotton on. And that's already come across a little bit in this interview. Can you give me an example of a time when you've become so frustrated with people that it's maybe boiled over and you perhaps didn't make the best decision?
Actually, I think I'm very good at remaining calm, even
you are,
even if I get angry. But look, I think when we started the company, right, like back in spirit 2016, but really 2017, there was no one who was willing to listen to what if this technology is not just like deepfakes and apocalypse. What if it's actually a new way of creating content, which is for sure going to have negative consequences, which we've always, I've always talked a lot about, done a lot of work, both internally and externally in the company to make sure we alleviate as much as we can. But it was so hard to get through to people, right? Every time I sat down in front of a journalist and I was like, finally, it feels like we can have like a conversation where maybe we talk 50% about the negatives and 50% about the positives.
Mea culpa, Victor. I've probably asked you about those deep fakes and you've probably just rolled your eyes at me.
It can be a little bit annoying to answer the same question over and over again. But on the other hand, right, when you feel like, well, the reason they're asking those questions is because they're just like behind on the timeline. That's actually the sign of a great business, right? I forgot who it is that said it, but there's someone who said that like a great idea is not a great idea unless most people disagree with it initially, except for very few select people that you deeply respect, right? And I think that goes for like business ideas. I think it goes for music. I think it goes for so many things in life that you should kind of. So to me, it gives me energy, I think, more than anything when people, wildly disagree with me.
Progress wasn't driven by everybody agreeing with the status quo, is what you're saying as well.
Exactly.
Let's go back to how you saw a bigger world and you got more excited.
So I did a semester at Stanford. I remember there was like, wow, this is like the exchange of ideas, like the level of debate, the curiosity, the interest in like also taking opposing viewpoints, and that was like a very, very different world than what I felt like I grew up in. I think growing up in Denmark, which is again, I love Denmark. It's an amazing place, but it's really not a place that inspires ambition and drive and innovation, right? It is a country where we have this concept called the law of Jante, which is essentially this idea that you shouldn't think you're someone special, right? Just like blend in with the crowd, sit down, get a job, live a normal life, and don't think you're someone special. It's not, of course, a real law, but it is something that sits very deep in Scandinavian culture, but also very specifically Danish culture, right? And so I think what I felt like I take from Denmark of positives is the focus on living a great life, taking care of everyone in society, and family values and living the good life, which I think is also what generally Scandinavia is known for out there in the world. Yeah, sure. But what I discovered in the US, right, was this, let's celebrate human greatness. Let's celebrate that people have drive and ambition. And it's okay to say, I want to build a big company, or like, I want to invent a new research paradigm. I want to do something big with my life, and seeing people around them not being like, oh, shut up, but being like, amazing, how can I help you, right? And I think that was a very big difference in like the mindset, the mentality.
Is it about the individual?
It's about the individual, but it's also just, I think actually at its core, it's a capitalistic thing, right? In the US, capitalism is like generally celebrated as a positive thing with sort of some negative side consequences for sure. But generally people believe that the capitalist society is a good society, right? In Denmark, that's not so much the case, right? I would say Denmark is of course a capitalistic society in many ways, but it is still very rooted in socialism. I think the mentality is just very, very, very different.
You've gone to Stanford, your eyes have been opened up, and then you end up in London. Why did you make the decision to come to London? Why are you not in Silicon Valley?
Well, I think part of the truth is probably that,
truth is always good on this show.
When I was... when I got back from those like 4 or 5 months I spent at Stanford, right, I knew I wanted to build my own company. I knew that I loved building products, which is what I was doing in Denmark. But in Denmark, we're building HR platforms, bookkeeping software, not things that I, on a personal level, found like terribly exciting, to be completely honest with you. I always loved sci-fi, I loved fringe technology ideas, and I wanted to see if I can combine my love for building products with my kind of personal interest in those things. And Denmark was very clearly not the place to do that. So I would probably have gone to the Valley if I could, but I had some friends in London, met a bunch of great people, ended up here, and basically spent a year figuring out like what company I wanted to build.
Tell me about that year. We know now, looking backwards, it was probably time well spent. How difficult was it for you? I presume scraping around financially, it was probably quite difficult. Tell me about that year in London.
Yeah. Well, so basically, me and another guy were kind of just freelancing, working for like some big companies, working a little bit for the government in terms of helping them with how can we make London into a great ecosystem for virtual reality and augmented reality, which in 2016 was like the hype cycle of the day, right? Like back then, we definitely thought that, we would be conducting this interview in VR and that the whole world was going to move into the metaverse.
Look at money Meta spent on it. Now we don't talk about it.
Exactly. There's I think a lot of good came out of that from a research perspective, and I still am a believer in VR in the long term. But I basically spent a year figuring out what to build, and I spent most of my time in the VR AR ecosystem. I kind of realized pretty early on that I wasn't super bullish on VR in its current state. Like the form factor was not there. It's too difficult to create content. And it just kind of gave me this feeling that this is not really going to last. And I kind of felt like, what if we could use some of these technologies to create video, which doesn't have the same distribution problem where you have to put on a clunky headset and sit at home and experience it. Everyone has access to video already, right? And I met this guy, Professor Mathias Nielsen, who became my co-founder, and he'd done a research paper called Face to Face, which is sort of one of the first papers that demonstrated a neural network that wasn't just analyzing data. That was mostly what people thought of machine learning as being back in 2016, right? Give a big data set and show us the patterns in that data. Mm-hmm. This is one of the first papers that used the neural network to actually generate new data. And in this case, video of people talking, which looked pretty realistic. If we look back at it today, of course, it's not so impressive any longer. But back then, I had this sort of eureka
This blew
moment.
your mind, this paper, didn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it's called Face to Face. I have it in my notes here that you absolutely fell in love with this concept. Mm-hmm. Was it a moment of epiphany for you?
It definitely was, and I think it's one of those moments where I think all of my interests in content and creating music, dabbling in 3D graphics, all the stuff as a kid, right? I looked at that and I was like, if this clip was made in Hollywood by how people do visual effects back then, this would have been like a 6-month project with 15 people and would cost $400,000, right? Yeah. This system is doing it completely automatically. Maybe it's not exactly up to the same standard, but there's something here that's extremely powerful, right? If we can begin to actually synthesize video content, and we don't need cameras, we don't need actors and studios, and all the things we need to make video, like what we're doing right now, that's going to be a Cambrian explosion of creativity, right?
It's frightening, the possibilities, isn't it? So 2017, you've been blown away by this face-to-face piece of research. Matthias, Stefan, and Lourdes as well. I think you decided to set up this company, Synthesia, as well. That was a massive decision, wasn't it? Did you realize then that this was the one that was going to occupy all your time, or did you have it as one of many irons in the fire?
I mean, we're up until then, we'd built, like me and my co-founder Stefan, and actually some people who ended up working in Synthesia, we had like a little kind of a crypto side project. We'd done like a few different things that ended up like just being mediocre, not really going anywhere. So we were experimenting with a bunch of different ideas, and we ended up focusing everything on Synthesia. I think not because we had like, massive data points to like back that up, but there's just something about it that felt very real. We were very convinced that this was not just like a fun little company we could build on the side. This could be something really, really, really big. It's actually fun because I don't think for me it was a big decision. A lot of people think that it's like this. For me, it's like I have nothing to lose. I'm in London. I'm making pretty crap money. I think this is interesting.
Lose, if you don't mind me saying, you have a lot to lose because you could do anything. The tech engineers and people of your skill set could build massive careers at Google, one of the banks, at loads of places. So by going hell for leather for this rather than going on other career paths, I think you have got a lot to lose potentially, haven't you? Or you just didn't see it like that?
I think it's a total misconception.
Yeah.
I think the more risky thing is just going down a boring corporate path, which is going to get, it's only going to get harder to get out of that, right? At this point in time, I'm not making lots of money. I don't have a corporate career I can lose. Maybe I'll spend 6 months or 12 months of this and it'll fail, and then I'll go do my corporate career.
You didn't have a big family and house and commitments, so
exactly.
Now that was the right time.
But I think it's more risky to go into a career that's safe and predictable, and you're going to make a lot of money very quickly. I've seen this across all of my friends, right? Because when you're making, I don't know, 100K a year and you're 25 years old, it's pretty hard to go out and say, I'm going to live on 20K a year and do a startup. When you're then 30, right, you're making a lot more than that if you're in finance or tech. It becomes progressively harder. So I think when you are young and you have nothing to lose, it's the most obvious time to try and do something like this.
That's a brilliant lesson to come from this interview for every young person, but for every person watching as well. You just got to go for it and not worry about all the other responsibilities that are going to come further down the line. It gets harder and harder as you go on.
But people catastrophize so much. Even if you do something as a 35-year-old, whatever, with a successful career, right? Let's say you spend 6 to 12 months on doing something and it doesn't work out. Then people have this idea that, they're never going to get a job again. They're going to look like absolute idiots. Every great company highly, highly, highly values people who tried something and failed. Like when I hire product managers, like my absolute favorite archetype is someone who built a startup and failed at it. So I think this perception that it's incredibly risky to start your own thing is actually most of the time wrong. Because, back then it was very difficult for us to raise money, for sure, but we also didn't have a lot to lose. If you've had a career at Google or finance and you have a good career, right, you can definitely raise enough money so that you can live for a year or two on maybe less salary than you used to. But I think people's general perception of like how risky it is like wildly off. I think it's so much more risky to just stay doing the same thing you've been doing for the last 10 years.
So you've gone for this company, and all of a sudden you're knocking on every single door finance-wise, trying to find the money. Did I get it right from an earlier conversation that you and I have had? You tried hundreds of people to get the money from?
Yes.
You've got this amazing technology, and most of the financiers and the VCs, they don't want to know.
Well, at that point, I thought it was amazing, right? I think clearly the rest of the market didn't really. But I think it was a classical thing where I was very young. I also, on paper, was the terrible founder for this. It was a total fringe idea. We went out and said to people, look, in 10 years, you can make a Hollywood film on a laptop with just your imagination. That's going to take a while to get there, but we think it's worthwhile building a company around this idea. And back then, everyone was only investing in fintech, maybe some like machine learning for data prediction and analysis and pattern matching, etc. So this was like a very, very kind of non-consensus idea at the time. And while I think a lot of people probably admired like the ambition of it, I think most people thought that it was just like completely crazy. So we went around and, we tried a lot of people, more than 100 people. We got turned down by most of them. I actually think if we'd been in the Bay Area, it would have been a lot easier. Someone would have given us money
because
much earlier on.
Because the ecosystem's in the Bay Area. The ecosystem's in Silicon Valley, isn't it?
But also because Silicon Valley, a majority of investors, especially angels, are technologists. Right. They're people who build products, who understand technology, right? The thing you often face in Europe, a lot of the investors and business angels, they're finance people. So when I come to you and put forward this idea, right, the first thing they start doing is like putting it in an Excel sheet. That's not going to work out, right? Because that Excel sheet is going to show you like absolutely not, completely risky. These guys have no idea what they're doing. But the right technologist might look at it and see, this is a weird idea, but do we believe enough in the founders, the team, that they can figure out something? Assuming you, of course, believe in the end state, right? And I think after those 100 people, the story which I've told many times, that we sent a cold email to Mark Cuban, who was one of the people we had in our list of people who could be interesting. And Mark Cuban, he was actually one of the first people to bring radio online, which he sold to Yahoo for more than $3 billion. And there's a very interesting lesson in there, because we sent him an email. He doesn't do calls. So we had a 14-hour email exchange with him without ever speaking to him live. And it was basically just us sending, here's what we're doing, what do you think? Him sending some questions back, and this just kept on and on for a very long time. And he ended up saying after 14 hours, I'll invest $1 million, assuming the sort of diligence of the two of you goes through, right? And the lesson here is that Mark Cuban already believed that in 10 years this is going to be possible. He had actually implemented the paper himself face-to-face with like a tutor at home or something, because he was so fascinated by it. And so he wasn't really challenging us like if this is going to happen or not. He was more trying to figure out, like, do these guys have any idea of like how to seize this opportunity? And it's so evident when you look at that email exchange that was what we were discussing. And so I think the lesson that I took away from that is that when you're doing something which is very non-consensus, you have to try and find people who don't have to convince of the vision, just have to convince them of you, right? If you have to both convince them of the vision and that you're the right person to tackle it, it's very, very, very difficult.
It's really interesting. I've got friends who are in pitches sometimes from both the financer point of view and indeed from the innovator point of view. And to a man and to a woman, they tell me it's all about the belief in the person themselves, how genuine you think that person is. If you're trying to fake it, it just won't work. It's all about the person, looking them in the eyes and just saying, I really believe in this and I can do this. Is it about that as far as you're concerned?
For sure. I mean, I'm a very active angel investor myself, right? And I've been very fortunate to be on the other side of the table of great founders. And I think it is that, right? Like, the founder is so much more important than the idea. Most great companies go through a chaotic period in the beginning of like trying to figure out what to do. And so did we. You know, we started off trying to create technology for Hollywood studios, video professionals. Everyone was already making video. And then we realized 3 years later that actually this is the completely wrong people we're building for. We need to build for your average PowerPoint user who have no clue about how to make video, but desperately wants to make more video, right? And that's a story that you see in most, great companies.
But tell me about what you see in someone when you're looking them in the eye. What do you see in that person? As you say, it's about the person rather than the ideas that makes you want to invest in them.
I mean, you want to see the fire, right? You want to see that they really want this. Yeah. And then I think I look a lot for rebelliousness. I look for someone who has strong opinions, but loves engaging in discussion. You can have very strong opinions, but be very stubborn and hard to discuss with. And I think that's generally not a great trait, because then you really have to be right all the time, which some people are. But I think the best is when you can have people that have low ego, have high conviction on something, but love discussing it, love to be challenged, right?
You're looking for Victor Riparbelli, aren't you?
I guess
it sounds like the qualities you're looking for
look a little bit for yourself.
Are the qualities that you see your best qualities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think, but I do think that is a general trend. Of course, it comes in all different shapes and sizes, and there's things like deep domain expertise that's also can be a good thing, can also be a bad thing. I had not that much domain expertise, but I do think those are some very important traits of entrepreneurs.
How do you cope with bad decisions? And when you've made a bad decision, how do you pick yourself up? How do you evaluate that bad decision? I'm just very interested because you're clearly very successful. I wouldn't be talking to you now if you weren't. But you've clearly made some tough and bad decisions along the way. Can you think of any great examples of where you've made a bad decision and how you've reacted?
I mean, we've made so many, bad decisions along the way. I think luckily we made more right ones than bad ones. But I think if you're not making bad decisions, you're moving too slow, right? Like, that's just like, if you're building a startup, you're never going to have perfect information, and you don't have time to wait for perfect information. So you have to it's better to make a decision than not make a decision. The most important thing is just to be open about when you've made a mistake, right? I think in general, we try to hire smart people with low egos, where, because you make a wrong decision, we make a wrong bet on a product, that's fine. That's a learning experiment. If we do it 10 times in a row, we probably have an issue, right? But if we do it a few times, that's fine. That should be part of learning. And, we make wrong decisions all the time. Last year, we built a product which didn't really go where I wanted it to go. That's okay, as long as we just cut the losses and move on to the next thing. I think we should celebrate that we move fast and we try out a lot of things.
Tell me about ego. You get this amazing coder or engineer who's absolutely fantastic, but they've got an ego that's sky high. But that person is so smart, but they really are very much about themselves. But they're really good. Yeah. Do you hire them?
I mean, generally, I would say no. We're 550 people, right? So obviously, you can always tell initially from a job. And so I won't say like, it's like everyone in Synthesia is just like extremely smart and very low ego. Of course, it's but on average, I think we actually are we're sticking to that. At that scale, obviously, I'm not interviewing everyone any longer, right? But then it becomes very much about who you're hiring as leaders. Yeah. And if you hire the right leaders, they'll project those values down in the organization as well.
What do you think about the crazy salaries that are being thrown around for the best in tech now? I mean, I'm trying to think of the right numbers, 6, 7, 8, 9-figure salaries. It's gone mad, hasn't it?
I think it has. I think there's two perspectives in this. There's one, which is that these people are like athletes. Yeah. And they should be paid like athletes. And honestly, a lot of them still aren't paid by athletes. And as someone who has zero interest in sport, I think it's only rational that the world's best AI researchers gets paid like 20% of some guy or woman who runs around on a field and kicks a leather ball, right? Like I don't understand like how that's worth that much money. But obviously, a lot of people disagree with that. So I think there is this sort of athlete idea, right? That you have these people who are just so much better than the people behind them that they could be the ones behind the next breakthrough. I'm not convinced that we've seen that to be true. I think if you're building an application layer company, which is what we're doing, then I think you want to be be sensible.
Couple more quick questions. You're a young company. You're a big unicorn, though. You're worth over $2 billion, according to some of the latest estimates as well. What's the next big decisions that Victor Riparbelli has to make?
I think if you look at like very successful companies, right, they all go through these sort of trials in some way, right? The first one is like, can you build a product that someone will pay you for? That's a good start. Can you build a product that can grow quickly enough to sustain you raising VC funding and VC valuations, right? That's also pretty difficult. Once you get to the, which we surpassed like earlier this year, $100 million of ARR of revenue per year, then you have to start thinking about, okay, that's a lot of money, right? And that's, I think we've done phenomenally well to get to where we are today. But our aspirations are very, very big, right? Getting to $1 billion in revenue for $100 million is a different playbook, right? It probably requires us to go multi-product, right? We need to expand outside of the core, video that we have. It requires a very different level of execution at a massive scale. Operating with, almost 600 people now versus 50 people or 100 people just a couple of years ago is very different. And so there's a lot of decisions there on like, who do you hire? What products do you invest in? How good are you at still taking big risks and being right? And I think that's the thing that's really hard about late stage startups, right? It's like, you have to take risks. It can be very easy to retract from taking risks because there's so much things you want to build. There's such a big organization, but you have to take risks, but you also have to be right. Like you can make some mistakes as we discussed before, but if you're not right about a new product within, a couple of years, you're probably, you might have a problem, right? So those are some of the big decisions that's ahead of us right now.
Do you feel that one day you will find it more difficult being the CEO of a big and growing company compared with being an entrepreneur and a founder? Very often, founders and entrepreneurs, they find that as the company gets bigger, the skill set changes and perhaps some of the joy comes out of it. Can you see yourself having to make that decision at any stage where you say, I just prefer creating companies rather than running companies?
I mean, if at one day I'm not the best CEO of Synthesia, no matter what I think, then I should step down. I still think I am the right CEO of Synthesia. It is a very different job leading a company at this stage.
Is it as much fun?
I think some parts of it are more fun. Some parts of it are less fun. I'm very fortunate that I have a co-founder, Stefan, right? And we actually, I have the CEO title, but really we're kind of co-CEOs, and we've split the company in half. So I get to run product and technology. I get to generally be the face of the company, the storytelling, sitting here with you, for example, which is lovely. He runs more kind of the operations, sales, etc. And that means that I get to focus on what I think I am uniquely good at, which is, I think, the product and the storytelling. Of course, there's a lot of work around that, but I try and carve out time to still be very deep in the product. And that's the thing I think that I am good at. But of course, it is very different, right? I think one thing I found is that you really want to make sure you hire like a great team of executives that have seen things at scale and that can help you along that journey that you can learn from. I mean, my job changes every 3 or 6 months, right?
Final question. I interviewed an amazing woman who was the head of an extraordinary biochemical company. And she said, no one teaches you CEO school. No one tells you how lonely it can be at the top being a CEO, how difficult that is as well. Do you find it weighs heavily on you having to make the ultimate decisions being the CEO? For sure. I think ultimately you have the responsibility, right? Like there is no one above you that you or anyone else can blame for the company's performance. And that's a big responsibility, right? For the investors, of course, but also for the people who work in the company. And I think it is very true that, there is no playbook, right? A lot of it is dealing with humans and coordination at scale, which is a lot of like personalities that you're dealing with. Then there's the way that you work. I think some of the lessons that I think we've made is you have to try and be lead in your own style. Like you cannot be someone else. I'm, for example, not someone who is like very, very, very structured. Like I think that's the creative part of me. That's like I'm an ideas man, like storytelling. I'm not someone who's like very, very structured. It also means that I need to find people and work with people who are okay with a little bit of chaos, and they can introduce some structure as well. But I've gone through periods where I've been like, as a CEO, I should be doing this.
I should be extremely structured. I should be run my company in like this specific way. But that's where it's important, where we started off in this conversation, which is that there are rarely any right answers, right? Like whatever someone tells you is a completely different point in time, most likely in a completely different company. So you only really have your first principles to kind of reason from. Surround yourself with good people. Like I have lots of great founders on my cap table who are many steps ahead of us that can share their learnings. But ultimately, I think it's true, right? But I actually think that's true for most roles. Like I think the best people who do the best in life are the people who are okay with that uncertainty and kind of forge their own path.
Victor Riparbelli, thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you.
Victor Riparbelli is an entrepreneur. He's a whiz kid. He's a founder. He had so many doors shut in his face. But he, a European, has managed to build a European unicorn, multi-billion-dollar company on this continent. He hasn't felt the need to hightail it to Silicon Valley, to California. And he thinks he can grow this business in the hottest technology, in AI, and grow it in Europe. And if Europe's going to have a future with the hottest technologies around, clearly we're going to need more Victor Riparbellis. We're going to need more of these AI unicorns, not only to be founded, but to grow and prosper and become mega companies on this continent, not get taken out by the big tech companies in the US and elsewhere. I think it's fascinating, and the future of companies like Synthesia perhaps will dictate the future of Europe in the 21st century. Thanks for joining me on Executive Decisions. I would love to hear your feedback. Drop your thoughts in the comments or a review. And please hit that follow or subscribe button. Now, as we wrap season 1, I'm excited to share that there are more conversations to come. Join me from the World Economic Forum in Davos with a special lineup of guests for season 2. I'm looking forward to it. We'll see you then.